Ethan Walker slammed the truck door so hard the window rattled, dropped his forehead against the cold steel, and whispered to no one, Don't you dare show up." Too late. Headlights swung across the gravel. A car door opened. Boots hit the ground behind him, and then her voice steady in the dark. "I'm ready." He'd said it as a joke. "Come with me for a week." He never once believed she'd call his bluff at 4 in the morning with a bag in her hand and her whole life in 3 words. Here's the twist. By the end of that week, one of them would beg the other to turn the truck around and drive away forever. Tell me the city you're watching from down in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you still believe a broken man deserves one more chance, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. Ethan Walker set his coffee down so hard the whole counter jumped. "Say that again," he said. "Slow. Because I don't think I heard you right the first time." Claire Bennett didn't flinch. She never did. That was the first thing he'd ever noticed about her back, when he was just another tired face at the end of her counter, and it was the thing that still got under his skin 2 years later. "I said," she repeated, and she leaned both elbows on the counter so there was no more than a foot of air between them. "You're the loneliest man I've ever met who keeps insisting he likes it that way." "I never said I liked it. You didn't have to. You come in here 6 mornings a week, you sit in the same seat, you order the same thing, and you talk to me like I'm the only person on earth who's allowed within 10 feet of you. That's a man who likes his walls, Ethan. I've been serving coffee long enough to know." He picked the cup back up just to have something to do with his hands. He was 35 years old, a grown man, a father, a veteran, and this woman, half a foot shorter than him, could still make him feel like a kid who'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. "You're in a mood this morning," he said. "I'm always in a mood. You just usually deserve it." And there it was, the thing that had kept him coming back to that little cafe for 2 straight years. Not the coffee, which was fine, not the food, which was better. It was that she talked to him like he was a person and not a problem. Like he wasn't something fragile that might shatter if you said the wrong word. Because everyone else did. His mother did, God rest her. His sister still did every time she called. "How are you holding up, Ethan? Are you eating? Is Lily okay? Do you need money? Do you need me to come out there?" All of it soaked in that soft, careful voice people used on men who'd lost things. And he had lost things. That was the trouble. He'd lost enough that people had started treating the losing like it was the only true thing about him. But not Claire. Claire treated him like an ordinary pain in the neck. And he had come to need that more than he needed almost anything. "Refill?" she asked. "I've got a run today. Better not." "Where to this time?" "Long one, west. I'll be gone the better part of a week." Something crossed her face when he said it. Quick there and gone like a shadow off a passing car. If he hadn't spent 2 years memorizing the small print of that face, he'd have missed it. "A week," she said. "Give or take." "Who's got Lily?" "My sister's driving up from Ohio. She'll stay at the house." Claire nodded slowly and started wiping down a stretch of counter that was already clean. "So that's it then. You just vanish. One day you're here, next day you're 1,000 miles away, and I don't hear a word until you turn back up on a Tuesday looking like something the highway chewed on." "That's the job." "That's not what I asked." He set the cup down again, gentler this time. "What did you ask?" She stopped wiping. She looked at him, and there was something in it he wasn't used to seeing on her, something without any armor on it at all. "I asked how it's supposed to feel," she said, "for the people you leave behind." To understand why that landed the way it did, you have to understand the man. Ethan Walker had spent 9 years in the Navy. He'd been the kind of sailor that officers trusted with the jobs nobody wanted because he did them without complaint and without noise. He'd learned to sleep 4 hours and function on it. He'd learned to keep his mouth shut and his eyes open. He'd learned that the world did not owe you comfort, and that a man's job was to hold the line whether he felt like it or not. He came home from all that in one piece, at least on the outside. Married a woman named Rachel he'd known since high school. Had a daughter. Bought a small house on a street where the neighbors waved. For about 3 years, Ethan Walker had believed that he had done it, that he had gotten out clean, that he had built the ordinary life other men took for granted. Then Rachel sat him down at the kitchen table one night after Lily was asleep and told him she couldn't do it anymore. Do what he'd asked. He genuinely hadn't known. This, she said. You, the quiet. The way you look at me like you're waiting for something bad to happen. I feel like I'm married to a man behind glass, Ethan. I knock and you never open the door. He'd wanted to tell her the door was open. He'd wanted to tell her that this was just how he was built, that the quiet wasn't a wall, it was just the shape of him. But he'd stood there in his own kitchen with his hands hanging useless at his sides and said nothing at all. And later he understood that the nothing was the whole problem. The nothing was the thing she'd been leaving for years. She was gone within the month. Not to another man, he'd have almost preferred that something he could understand, something with a shape. She just left. Moved 2 states over. Called for Lily on Sundays, sent birthday cards faded like a photograph left in a window. And Ethan Walker, who had been trained his whole adult life to hold the line, found himself holding a 5-year-old's hand at a bus stop with absolutely no idea how you were supposed to raise a little girl alone. He learned. That was the one thing he knew how to do. Learn a hard thing by doing it wrong 100 times until it hurt less. He learned to braid hair by watching videos on his phone at midnight. He learned which cereal was allowed and which was a betrayal. He learned that a 7-year-old could ask you a question so simple it opened a hole straight through the center of your chest. Daddy, why doesn't Mommy live here? And that you had to answer it anyway in a steady voice because she was watching your face to find out whether the world was safe. He learned all of it. What he never learned was how to let another adult inside the door Rachel had spent years knocking on. Until Claire. He didn't leave that morning. Not right away. He should have. The truck was loaded, the run was scheduled, and the miles didn't care about a man's feelings. But her question sat on the counter between them like a live thing, and he found he couldn't walk out over the top of it. How's it supposed to feel? He repeated. For the people I leave behind. Forget it. It was a stupid thing to say. You don't say stupid things, Claire. That's not one of your problems. She almost smiled. Almost. I've got a lot of problems then, if that's the one I'm safe from. An older man, 2 stools down, Walt, a retired mechanic who'd been coming to that cafe since before either of them, who wore the same green cap every single day and had opinions about everything, lowered his newspaper. You two gonna keep doing this? Walt said. Or is one of you gonna say the thing? Eat your eggs, Walt, Claire said without looking at him. I'm just saying. Man's been coming in here 2 years. Sits in your section every day. You give him grief, he takes off anybody else on this planet. And now he's telling you he's leaving for a week, and you look like somebody kicked your dog. Walt lifted his coffee in a small salute. I've fixed transmissions for 40 years, sweetheart. I know a stuck gear when I hear one grinding. Walt. Just saying. The newspaper came back up. Ethan felt the tips of his ears going hot, which was a thing that hadn't happened to him since he was 19. He looked at Claire, and she was looking anywhere but at him, and for one long, ridiculous moment, the whole cafe seemed to be holding its breath. So he did the thing he always did when a feeling got too big to sit with. He made it a joke. Come with me then, he said. Claire went still. Come with me for a week, he went on, and he heard his own voice trying to keep it light, trying to slap a grin on it. You want to know how it feels for the people I leave behind? Come find out. Sit in the passenger seat for 1,000 miles. You might finally understand why I disappear every month. He spread his hands. Then you can quit giving me the sad eyes at 7 in the morning. He'd meant it to break the tension. That was all. Toss out something absurd. They'd both laugh, the moment would pass, and he'd get on the road. Claire didn't laugh. She looked at him, really looked in that way that made him feel like she could see clean, past the 2 years of counter-talk, to the parts of him he kept boarded up. And she said very quietly, Are you actually asking me? Or are you just afraid of hearing my answer? The cafe went quiet. Walt's paper didn't move, and Ethan Walker, who had faced down bad weather at sea, and worse things he never talked about, who had stood in an empty kitchen while his marriage walked out the door and had held his ground. Ethan Walker had absolutely nothing to say. Here's a thing about a joke. A joke is a door left open just a crack. A man tells one because he wants to see if the thing he's really thinking can survive out in the daylight. If you laugh, he can close the door and pretend there was nothing behind it. If you don't laugh, if you push the door instead of shutting it, then he's standing there exposed holding the truth. He tried to rap in a punchline, and there's no getting it back. Claire hadn't laughed. Claire had pushed the door, and Ethan stood there with the truth in his hands. Because the honest answer to, "Are you actually asking me?" was one. He couldn't say out loud in a cafe at 7 in the morning with Walt pretending to read the sports page and the fry cook pretending not to listen through the pass. The honest answer was, "I don't know," and that's what scares me. Because if he was only joking, then nothing had to change. He could get on the road, come home in a week, sit back down at that counter, and go on for another 2 years, exactly as they were safe, ordinary, close enough to touch, and never touching. He could keep her the way he had her now, the one person who talked to him straight, the bright spot in a gray week, a thing he could count on precisely because he'd never risked it. But if he was actually asking, then he was doing the one thing he'd sworn off the night Rachel walked out. He was opening the door. He was letting somebody all the way inside into the truck and the miles and the exhaustion and the empty motels and worse than any of it into the house where a 7-year-old girl was already down one mother and could not afford to get attached to somebody who might fade like a photograph in a window. He wasn't just risking himself. He was risking Lily. And that was a thing Ethan Walker did not do. "I've got to go," he said. It came out rougher than he meant it. He stood up, dug in his pocket, put a bill on the counter, too much the way he always tipped, because it was one of the few kindnesses he knew how to give, without having to say anything. Claire looked at the money, then at him. "Ethan, the load's not going to drive itself. I wasn't trying to corner you. I know. I was asking a real question. I know that too." He grabbed his cap off the counter, turned it in his hands. "That's kind of the problem." For a second, neither of them moved. 2 feet of counter, and 2 years of mornings between them, and both of them standing at the edge of something that if they stepped over, it could not be unstepped. "Have a safe run," she finally said. Quiet. Even. The armor back on, but not all the way, he could hear the crack in it. "Thanks." I was halfway to the door when she said his name again. "Ethan." He stopped. Didn't turn. "Whatever you decide," Claire said. "I'd rather have you tell me the truth than tell me a joke. Even if the truth's a no. Just don't make me guess. I've spent enough of my life guessing what a man really meant." He stood there with his hand on the door. I thought about turning around. He thought about walking back to that counter and saying the true thing, the whole true thing out loud in front of Walt and God and the fry cook. He thought about how it would feel to finally open the door all the way instead of leaving it cracked. And then he thought about Lily. About the bus stop. About a small hand in his and a small voice asking why Mommy didn't live here anymore, and the way he'd had to keep his face steady so she'd believe the world was safe. He didn't turn around. "See you in a week," he said. And he walked out into the cold. The road did not fix it. He'd half hoped it would. There's a thing that happens to a man behind the wheel of a big truck on an empty highway before the sun's all the way up. The world narrows to the 2 beams of your headlights and the hum of the engine and the white lines coming at you one after another, and it is the closest thing to peace a restless mind can find. Ethan had spent years using that road hum to sand the edges off whatever was chewing at him. Bills. Loneliness. The Sunday phone calls where Lily talked to a mother she barely knew, and Ethan sat in the next room with his jaw tight. The road usually took it. That morning, it wouldn't. Because he kept hearing her. "Are you actually asking me? Or are you just afraid of hearing my answer?" He gripped the wheel and drove, and the sentence went around and around like a stone in a boot. He tried to argue with it. "It was a joke, Claire. That's all it was. I don't even know why you'd..." But it hadn't been a joke, and he knew it, and worse, she knew it. That was the unbearable part. He could lie to himself all day long. He was good at it. He'd had practice, but he could not lie to that woman, and she had looked right at him and named the thing he'd spent 2 years not naming. He wanted her to come. There it was out on the road, where nobody could hear him think it. He wanted her to sit in the empty passenger seat. He wanted to point out the ugly, beautiful things you only see from a highway at 3 in the morning. He wanted to tell her about the Navy, the parts he never told anyone. He wanted to hear her give him grief for 1,000 straight miles. He wanted God help him to see her sitting at his own kitchen table teasing Lily about her cereal. He wanted a life. A whole one. The kind he'd told himself he'd already had his shot at and lost. And the wanting terrified him more than any weather ever had. He pulled into a fuel stop around noon, and while the tank filled, he stood in the cold with his phone in his hand and Claire's number on the screen, thumb hovering. He'd typed and deleted the same message 4 times. Hey, about this morning. Delete. I wasn't joking. Delete. Too much. Sorry if that was weird. Delete. Coward. He put the phone in his pocket. Then he took it out again. There was another number he could call. He'd been avoiding it. But standing there in the wind with the pump ticking behind him, he found he needed to hear a particular voice, and so he called his sister Dana up in Ohio, the one who'd raised him half the time when their mother was working, doubles the one who'd driven 11 hours to sit with him the week Rachel left without being asked. She picked up on the second ring. Everything okay? You never call from the road. Yeah, fine. Just is Lily up. Wanted to say hi before she goes to bed. Time zones. She's brushing her teeth. Hang on. A muffled shuffle. Dana's voice going far away. Lily, honey, it's your dad. And then the phone changed hands, and there was that small, bright voice that undid him every single time. Daddy. Hey, monkey, you give Aunt Dana a hard time yet? No. A pause. A little. He laughed and some of the stone in his chest loosened. That's my girl? You do your reading? Yeah, Daddy. What's up? When you come home, can we go to the cafe? Miss Claire said she'd teach me to do the milk drawings, the heart ones, on top of the coffee. But she said, I have to have a grown-up with me, and you're my grown-up. Ethan stood very still at the pump. She said that, he managed. Yeah, last week when we came in. She let me sit on the tall stool. She said I make good conversation. Lily said the word conversation carefully, proudly, like she'd been practicing it. Can we, Daddy, when you get home? He shut his eyes, because there it was. The thing he was so afraid of already happening, already too late to prevent. His daughter had a person too. His daughter who was supposed to be protected from getting attached to someone who might fade. His daughter was already halfway attached, was already saving up a small dream about milk drawings and a tall stool and a woman who told her she made good conversation. He hadn't been protecting Lily by keeping his walls up. He'd been fooling himself. The wall had a door in it, and his daughter had already walked through it while he wasn't looking, because a 7-year-old doesn't know she's supposed to be afraid of loving somebody. Only grown men know that. Only men who've been left. Daddy, you still there? I'm here, baby. His voice came out thick and he cleared it. Yeah, when I get home. We'll go see Miss Claire and you'll do the milk drawings, I promise. Yes. He could hear her jumping. Okay, Aunt Dana says teeth. Love you. Drive careful, don't hit any deers. Deer, he said automatically. No S, and I won't. Love you, monkey. To the moon. And back, she said, and was gone. He stood at the pump long after the tank was full, holding a dead phone, watching his own breath in the cold. He drove another 200 miles that afternoon, and he didn't hear the road at all. He heard Rachel at the kitchen table. I feel like I'm married to a man behind glass. He heard Claire at the counter, don't make me guess. I've spent enough of my life guessing what a man really meant. He heard Lily, you're my grown-up. And somewhere in those 200 miles, something in Ethan Walker that had been locked since a night at a kitchen table 3 years back began very slowly to turn. I thought about what it had cost him the walls. He'd built them to keep the hurt out. That was the deal a man made. You close the door, you don't get left again. But that wasn't the whole bill, was it? Because the door didn't only keep the hurt out. It kept everything out. 2 years of the best mornings of his life, spent on one side of a counter close enough to touch, never touching. because he was so busy protecting himself from a loss that he was already living inside the loss. He'd been so afraid of someday standing in an empty kitchen again that he'd made a whole life out of standing in one now. And the worst part, the part that made his hands tighten on the wheel until the knuckles went white, was that Claire had never once asked him to change. Not like Rachel. Rachel had knocked on the glass and asked him to become a different man. Claire just gave him grief across a counter and asked one time whether he had the guts to tell the truth. She wasn't asking him to be less afraid. She was just asking him to stop pretending he wasn't. He pulled off at a rest area as the sun went down. He sat in the cab in the dark with the engine ticking as it cooled, and he took out his phone, and this time he didn't type and delete. He typed the true thing. His thumb shook a little doing it, which was a thing he'd have been ashamed of once, but he wasn't ashamed anymore. He was 35 years old, and he was done being ashamed of the one part of himself that still wanted a life. He wrote it wasn't a joke. He looked at it a long time. Then he wrote more because she deserved more than 3 words, because she'd asked him not to make her guess, and he was through making people guess. I wasn't joking this morning. I've been not joking for about 2 years, and I got good at hiding it. You asked if I was afraid to hear your answer. I was. I still am. But you were right. I've got walls, and I built them for a reason. And the reason is, I got left once, and I've got a little girl who can't get left again, and I don't know how to open a door without risking both of us. That's the truth. All of it. I'm sorry I gave you a punchline instead. He read it 3 times. His thumb hovered over send. And then he thought about Lily on the phone. She said, I make good conversation, and he understood that he'd already been overruled. The risk he'd been so carefully avoiding, the two of them getting attached to someone who might leave, had happened without his permission, the way the important things always do. He'd spent so long guarding the door that he'd never noticed his daughter had already opened it, and that on the other side of it wasn't danger at all. It was just Claire, wiping down a clean counter, teaching a fatherless little girl to pour a heart into a cup of coffee, telling her she made good conversation. He sent it. Then he set the phone face down on the passenger seat, the empty passenger seat, and he put both hands over his face, and for the first time since a night 3 years ago at a kitchen table, Ethan Walker let himself feel the whole size of what he wanted, instead of shrinking it down into something safe. The phone buzzed. I didn't look. Couldn't for a second. His heart was going like he was 19 again, and the ship was leaving harbor. It buzzed a second time. He took a breath, the kind of breath they'd taught him to take before the hard thing in through the nose hold, let it go, and he turned the phone over. 2 messages. The first one said, I know it wasn't a joke. I've known for about 2 years too. And the second one, sent a few seconds after, said only, when do you leave? Not this run. The next one. I want to know how long I've got to decide whether I'm brave enough to meet you at your truck. Ethan Walker sat alone in a dark cab at a rest area 800 miles from home, reading those words over and over, and he did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He laughed, a real one this time, out loud to nobody, a little wet at the edges. Then he typed back the truest, simplest thing he had, take all the time you need. I'll be there either way. I'll always be there either way. That's the part I should have told you a long time ago. He set the phone down. Outside the windshield, the last of the light was going out of the sky, and the first stars were coming up over the fields, and for the length of a whole highway, he had thought this feeling in his chest was fear. Sitting there in the dark, he finally let himself call it by its real name. It wasn't fear. It never had been. He came home a week later to a house that smelled like his sister's cooking, and a 7-year-old who launched herself off the porch steps before he'd even shut the truck door. Daddy. Hey, monkey. He caught her mid-air. He always did. The way that made his shoulder ache now. In a way it hadn't at 25. And he held on a beat longer than usual. You get taller? Somebody's been feeding you. Aunt Dana made pot roast 3 times. 3 times. He looked over Lily's head at Dana in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. You trying to make me look bad? You already look bad, Dana said. You look like you haven't slept since Tuesday. He hadn't. But that was a different conversation, and it wasn't one he was going to have with a 7-year-old wrapped around his neck. That night, after Lily was down, and Dana had poured them both coffee, she knew he wouldn't sleep off anyway. His sister sat across the kitchen table from him, the same table. Though she didn't know that the table where Rachel had told him she was leaving, and she folded her hands and looked at him the way she'd looked at him their whole lives, like she could already read the last page. "So who is she?" Ethan turned his cup a quarter turn on the wood. "Who's who?" "Ethan, I raised you half your life. You've had a phone glued to your hand for 7 days, and you keep smiling at it like an idiot, and then catching yourself and putting it away like it burned you. That's not a bill collector. Who is she?" He didn't answer right away. Then, because it was Dana, because she'd driven 11 hours once without being asked, he said it. "Her name's Claire." "Claire." Dana said it carefully, testing it. "The Cafe Claire. The one Lily won't shut up about, the milk drawing one. That's her." "Huh." Dana sat back. "How long?" 2 years. 2 years. His sister's eyebrows went up and stayed there. "You've been in love with a woman for 2 years and you're only telling me now." "I never said you didn't have to. You've got the same face you had at 16 when you liked that girl who worked concessions at the movie theater and you were too scared to buy popcorn." She smiled, but it didn't last, and something softer moved in behind it. "Ethan, what are you scared of?" And he told her. He told her about the joke that hadn't been a joke, and the text he'd sent from a dark rest area 800 miles out, and the answer that came back, "I want to know how long I've got to decide whether I'm brave enough to meet you at your truck." He told her about Lily on the phone, the tall stool, the milk drawings. She said, "I make good conversation." He told her the thing he hadn't said out loud to a single living person. "I got left once," he said. "I stood right here at this table, and I let it happen because I didn't know how to do anything else. And I lived. Barely, but I lived. But if I let this happen, if I open that door and let her all the way in, into the truck, into this house, into Lily's life, and then it goes bad." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Lily can't lose 2 of them, Dana. She can't. It's one thing to gamble with my own." "Stop." Dana said it quietly, but it landed like a hand flat on the table. "Just stop. You listen to me. You think you're protecting that little girl by keeping everybody at arm's length. You're not. You know what she asked me 4 different nights this week? She asked why you're sad. A 7-year-old. She said, 'Aunt Dana, why is Daddy sad even when he's smiling?'" Dana let that sit. "You're not protecting her from watching somebody leave. You're teaching her that love's a thing you brace against. That's what she's learning in this house, Ethan. Not from anything you say, from watching you flinch. I didn't have anything for that." "That woman didn't ask you to change," Dana went on. "You told me yourself. She asked you to be honest. Rachel wanted a different man. This one just wants the real one. And you're gonna throw that away because 30 years ago, your daddy walked out on Mama and taught you men don't get to keep good things." She reached across and put her hand over his. "Baby, the next run. You said she wants to know when the next run is. When is it?" "Thursday." "Then Thursday morning," Dana said, "you get in that truck, and you leave the passenger door unlocked. That's all you have to do. You don't have to be brave enough for the whole thing. You just have to be brave enough to leave one door unlocked and see who shows up." He left the door unlocked. Thursday came cold and black. 4 in the morning, the streetlights still buzzing, and the whole world asleep. He'd told himself all week he wouldn't hope. He'd told himself she probably wouldn't come, that it was a lot to ask of anybody, that a woman with her own life and her own cafe shifts and her own bruised history didn't just walk away from all of it because a lonely trucker sent her a text from a rest area. He'd rehearsed the disappointment so he could survive it. He was good at rehearsing disappointment. He'd had practice. He loaded the last of his gear, slammed the driver's door so hard the window rattled and dropped his forehead against the cold steel, and he whispered it out loud. The way you whisper a prayer you're afraid to have answered. "Don't. Don't you dare show up." Because if she showed up, it was real. If she showed up, there was no more joke to hide behind, no more counter between them, no more 2 feet of safe air. If she showed up, he had to actually do the thing. Headlights swung across the gravel. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He heard the car, her little hatchback. He knew the sound of it from the cafe lot, pull up and idle and cut off. He heard the door open. He heard boots hit the ground behind him, one and then the other, and then footsteps on the gravel, slow coming toward him, stopping a few feet back. And then her voice steady in the dark, steadier than his heart had any right to expect. "I'm ready." He turned around. She was standing there in a jacket too thin for the cold, a small canvas bag over one shoulder, her breath fogging in the streetlight. She looked terrified. She looked like she'd been up all night. She looked like the bravest thing he'd ever seen. "Claire, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say something to talk me out of it. I've been sitting in that parking lot for 40 minutes, talking myself out of it, and I'm all out. So if you've changed your mind, you have to just say it fast right now, like ripping off a bandage because I don't have any more nerve left to spare." "I haven't changed my mind." "Okay." She let out a breath that shook. "Okay, good. That's okay." Neither of them moved. "You're staring," she said. "I know, sorry, I just—" He shook his head. "I told myself you wouldn't come, all week, so I wouldn't—" "So you wouldn't get your hopes up." "Yeah." "Ethan." She took a step closer. "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard a man say at 4 in the morning, and I once dated a guy who cried at a car commercial. You have to stop that. You have to stop bracing for the bad thing before it happens. You're gonna spend your whole life ducking a punch nobody's throwing." He almost laughed. His sister had said nearly the same words 2 nights ago at the kitchen table. He wondered what it said about him that the 2 women who saw him clearest had never met. "Get in the truck," he said, and his voice cracked doing it. "Passenger side's unlocked. It's been unlocked all week if you want the truth. I just didn't think you'd try the handle." She looked at him for a long second. Then she walked around the front of the truck, and he heard the passenger door open, and he stood there in the cold a moment longer alone, letting himself feel the whole size of it. She actually came before he climbed up behind the wheel. She was already buckled in bag between her feet, hands folded in her lap like a kid on the first day of school. "So," she said, "how's this work? You sit there, I drive. We talk if we want to, we don't if we don't. There's coffee in the thermos, it's terrible. I made it myself. We stop when I need fuel, or you need a bathroom, whichever comes first, and it's usually you." He put the truck in gear. "That's the whole job, Claire. It's 1,000 miles of nothing. I keep telling you that, and you keep not believing me. Maybe I don't come for the something," she said quietly. "Maybe I come for the nothing. Maybe some of us like the nothing better with company." He didn't have an answer for that either. He pulled out onto the empty road, and the streetlights slid past one by one, and the town gave way to the county highway, and the county highway gave way to the interstate. And somewhere in the first 40 minutes, neither of them said a word. But it wasn't the old silence, the counter silence, the 2 feet of safe air silence. It was a new one. It was the silence of 2 people who'd finally stopped pretending, sitting close in the dark, listening to the road. Both of them scared out of their minds, and neither of them running. The sun came up around 6, gray and then gold, and Claire watched it out the windshield with her chin on her knees, and Ethan watched her out of the corner of his eye when he was sure she wasn't looking. "You're doing it again," she said without turning her head. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like I'm gonna disappear if you blink. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. I'm belted into a truck doing 70 on an interstate. I couldn't leave if I tried. That's the most romantic thing anybody's said to me in 3 years." She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and it was the best sound he'd heard in longer than he could count. "Okay," she said, settling back into the seat. "Okay. If we're gonna do 1,000 miles, I need to know things about you. Real things, not counter things." "What's a counter thing? How's the coffee, Claire?" "Weather's turning, Claire." "You want the eggs today, Claire?" 2 years of that. I know your order and your tip, and I know you take Lily's calls, even when you're driving, even though you shouldn't. I don't know anything real. So. She turned in the seat to face him. "Tell me about the Navy." His hands tightened on the wheel. Just a little. She saw it. She saw everything. You don't have to, she said softer. But we've got 1,000 miles and I'd rather spend them learning you than learning the mile markers. He drove a while before he answered. She let him. That was another thing about her he was learning. She knew when to push the door and when to just leave it cracked and wait. 9 years, he finally said. Enlisted at 18, got out at 27. It's not what people think. It's not the movies. Most of it's boredom. Waiting. You're a long way from home in a metal box, and you learn to make the box your whole world, because the alternative is losing your mind, missing the world you left. He glanced at her. You learn to not need things. That's the real training nobody tells you about. You learn to not need warmth, not need quiet, not need a good bed or good food or a soft voice. You learn to run on nothing, and you get good at it. And then you come home, and you're supposed to just need things again. Want things. And nobody teaches you how to turn that part back on. Claire didn't say anything. But she'd shifted in her seat, and now her knee was almost touching the console, almost touching the space between them closer than she'd been. That's what happened with Rachel, he said, and he was surprised to hear himself say it, the name out loud to her. My wife. X. She used to say I was a man behind glass. She'd knock and I never opened the door. And I couldn't tell her I didn't have the words then, that I wasn't keeping the door shut on her. I just didn't know it was open. I'd spent 9 years learning to not need anybody, and then I came home and married somebody, and she needed me to need her back, and I didn't know how. I didn't know how, Claire. So she left. 3 years ago, right at my kitchen table. Told me she felt like she'd been living with a ghost. He swallowed. And the worst part, the part I never told anybody, is I understood. I couldn't even be angry. She was right. I was a ghost. I'd been a ghost since I was 27, and I didn't know how to be anything else. And Lily, 5 when it happened, 7 now. His whole voice changed when he said his daughter's name went warmer, went human. She's the reason I'm not a ghost anymore. Or she's the reason I fight it. You can't be a ghost and raise a little girl. She needs a real live person who braids her hair and burns the pancakes and shows up. So every morning I get up and I put the person on. Like a coat. I put on Dad and I zip it up and I do the day. And most days by the afternoon, it's not a coat anymore. It's just me. She pulls the real me out just by being 7 and needing me. He shook his head. But the mornings are hard. The mornings I have to remember how to be a person. Claire was quiet for a long moment. That's why you come to the cafe, she said slowly, like she was solving something. 6 mornings a week. Same seat. It's not the coffee. No. It's you come to remember how to be a person before you have to go home and be one for her. He didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice. Ethan. Her hand came off her lap and landed on the console, palm up open, not reaching for him just there. An offer. Pull off at the next stop for a second. I've got a schedule. Pull off at the next stop. He pulled off at the next stop. A wide gravel shoulder with a view of nothing, brown fields to the horizon, a busted fence. He put it in park and left the engine running, and he didn't look at her because he was afraid of what was on his own face. Look at me, she said. He looked at her. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not counter-hear it, not brace against it. Okay. I didn't get in this truck because I felt sorry for you. I don't feel sorry for you. I've served coffee to sad men for 11 years, and I'd have run out of pity a long time ago if that's all this was. She took a breath. I got in this truck because for 2 years, you've been the only man who came to my counter and talked to me like I was a person and not a thing to be handled or a thing to be gotten past to get to something else. You gave me grief about my terrible taste in music. You remembered that my mother was sick. You asked about her every week. You remembered her name. You are the kindest man I have ever met, and you have no idea because you're too busy calling yourself a ghost. His hands were shaking. He put them on the wheel so she wouldn't see, but of course she saw. So I need you to stop bracing, she said. Just for this week, for 7 days. I need you to try one time believing that somebody could see the whole thing. The walls and the ghost and the man behind glass and the little girl and the terrible coffee, and choose it anyway. Not choose to fix it. Choose it As is. Can you do that? For 7 days. Ethan Walker sat on a gravel shoulder in the middle of nowhere, with the engine running, and a woman he'd loved for 2 years asking him to do the one thing he'd sworn he'd never do again. And he found that his throat had closed all the way up, and his eyes were burning, and there was nothing left of the joke, nothing left to hide behind, nothing left but the true thing. "I don't know if I can," he said. "But I want to. God, Claire, I want to. That's the most I've been able to say to anybody in 3 years. I want to." "Then that's enough for today," she said. And she squeezed his forearm once firm, the way you'd steady a man on unsteady ground and let go. "Drive. We've got a schedule." He laughed, wet and broken and real, and he put it in gear and he drove. They talked all through Missouri. It came easier after the shoulder, the way things do once the hardest thing's been said. She told him about her mother, the one he'd asked about every week, the one who'd raised Claire and her 2 brothers on a waitress's tips and a night shift janitor's paycheck. She told him her mother had been sick for 3 years and had passed the winter before last, and that she'd never told him because he'd asked about her every single week like she was still alive, and Claire couldn't stand to take that away from either of them. "You asked me on a Tuesday how she was doing," Claire said, looking out the window. "And she'd been gone 6 days. And I just said, about the same, because you had this look on your face, like her being okay was one of the good things you were counting on that week. And I couldn't take one of your good things." Ethan drove for a mile before he could speak. "You carried that by yourself," he said, "for a year and a half, because you didn't want to make my Tuesday worse. It sounds stupid when you say it out loud." "It's not stupid. It's the least stupid thing I've ever heard." He shook his head, and there was something fierce in it. "You've been taking care of me for a year and a half, and I didn't even know it. I've been sitting on that stool thinking I was the broken one, and you were—" He stopped. "Claire, who takes care of you?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. "My last guy was supposed to," she said after a while. "Take care of me. That was the pitch anyway. Kevin, 3 years. He was on paper, he was everything. Good job, said the right things, everybody's mother loved him." She picked at the hem of her jacket. "And about a year in, I started to notice that every time I wanted something, a class, I wanted to take a trip, I wanted to save for this dream I had about opening my own place someday, a little cafe, my own." She waved a hand. "Every time I wanted something, it was an inconvenience. It was too much. I was too much." "You're so much, Claire." He said it like it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke, it was a leash. And I got smaller and smaller, trying not to be too much. Until one day, I looked in the mirror and I didn't recognize the woman looking back, because she'd made herself into a person who didn't want anything, just so she'd be easy to love. Ethan's jaw was tight. "What happened?" "My mother got sick, and I needed him. For the first time in 3 years, I actually needed something from him, needed him to show up, and he—" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He said it was a lot. My mother was dying, and it was a lot for him. And I sat in that hospital by myself at 2 in the morning, and I realized I'd spent 3 years making myself small for a man who wouldn't even be big for me one single time when it mattered. So when Mama passed, I buried her, and then I left him too. Same month." She turned to Ethan. "That's why I know your look. The bracing. Because I did it too for a whole year after. I decided I was never gonna want anything from anybody ever again, because wanting things is how they get you. Wanting things is the leash." The truck hummed. Fields slid by. "We're a hell of a pair," Ethan said finally. "Me learning not to need things in the Navy. You learning not to want things from Kevin. 2 people who taught themselves not to want or need a single thing sitting in a truck, both of them so scared they're gonna scare the other one off by wanting too much." When you say it like that, it sounds almost funny. "It's not funny." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He reached over. He didn't plan it. His hand just came off the wheel and found hers on the console, and he laced his fingers through hers, and he kept his eyes on the road, because he couldn't do it, and look at her at the same time, and he said, "For the record, whatever you want, the class, the trip, the little cafe, all of it, it's not too much. I don't know what happens with us, Claire. I don't know if I'm brave enough to be what you need. I've got a lousy track record and a kid and a ghost living in my chest. But I know that. Whatever you want, it's not too much. You're not too much. You were never too much. That guy was just too small. Claire Bennett turned her face to the window so he wouldn't see her cry, and she held onto his hand like it was the only solid thing for 1,000 miles, and she didn't let go for 60 more. They stopped that night at a truck stop outside Amarillo, 2 rooms, because he insisted, because he wasn't going to let this be a thing. She wondered about later, whether she'd been pressured, whether she'd owed him something for the ride. He got 2 rooms, and he walked her to her door, and he stood there a foot away, with his cap in his hands. I meant it, he said. About the 2 rooms. This isn't I didn't bring you out here to. I know. I just wanted to be near you. That's the whole I've spent 2 years 2 feet away from you across a counter, and I just wanted for 1 week to be near you without a counter in the way. That's all. That's everything I wanted, and I didn't even have the guts to want it out loud. Ethan. She stepped in. She put her hand flat on his chest over the ghost, over the coat he zipped up every morning, over the 2 years of counter talk, and the 9 years of learning not to need, and the 3 years of standing behind glass. You're wanting it out loud right now. Yeah. His voice broke. I guess I am. Good. She rose up and kissed his cheek slow, and he shut his eyes, and she whispered right against his skin. Keep doing that. Wanting things out loud. It looks good on you. And she stepped back into her doorway. Good night. Call Lily. She'll want to know you didn't hit any deers. Deer, he said automatically. No S. She smiled and shut the door. He called Lily from the parking lot, leaning against the truck, watching the neon buzz. Daddy, did you hit a deer? No deer, monkey. I'm being careful. Aunt Dana let me have ice cream for breakfast. She did not. She did don't tell. A pause, and then in the too casual voice a 7-year-old uses when she's actually asking something enormous. Daddy, is Miss Claire on your trip? Ethan went still against the truck. Why do you ask that, baby? Because Aunt Dana was on the phone with somebody, and she said, I hope Claire's making him talk about his feelings, and then she saw me, and she said a bad word, and hung up. A beat. Is Miss Claire there? He closed his eyes. He thought about lying the way he'd lied his whole life. The small protective lies, the everything's fine. Monkey, go to sleep. And then he thought about Dana at the kitchen table. You're teaching her that love's a thing you brace against. She's learning it from watching you flinch. And he thought about the whole point of this week, which was that he was done making people guess. Yeah, baby, he said. Miss Claire's on the trip. A long silence. His heart was going. Is she going to teach me the milk drawings? Lily asked. The heart ones. And Ethan Walker leaned his head back against the cold metal of his truck under a buzzing neon sign, 1,000 miles from home. And he laughed, because of course, that was the thing she cared about. And he said, yeah, monkey, when we get home, she's going to teach you the heart ones, I promise. Okay, I love you. Drive careful. Good night. And muffled, already turning away from the phone. Aunt Dana, Miss Claire is on the trip. And then faintly Dana's voice saying the bad word again. Ethan stood in the lot a long time after the call ended, holding a dark phone, and he realized that the thing he'd been so afraid of. Lily getting attached. Lily getting her hopes up. Lily, maybe getting left had already happened months ago on a tall stool at a cafe counter, and that it hadn't ruined anybody. His daughter had opened the door he'd spent 3 years guarding, and on the other side of it was a woman teaching a fatherless little girl to pour a heart into a cup of coffee. He'd been guarding an open door. The next morning she was waiting by the truck before he was 2 coffees in her hands, and she gave him one and said, It's not as bad as yours, but it's close. Don't get used to it. And they climbed in and drove west into the sun, and it should have been the easiest day of the whole trip. It wasn't. Because somewhere around noon, high up on a mountain grade with the sky turning the wrong color behind them, Claire noticed his hands. You're gripping the wheel funny. Weather's coming in. How bad? Don't know yet. He checked the mirror. The clouds behind them had gone from gray to a bruised purple-black, stacking up over the peaks, moving faster than weather had any right to move. Maybe nothing. Maybe we outrun it. There's a pass up ahead if we can get over it before it hits. We're fine. It's the getting caught on the grade you don't want. And if we don't outrun it, then we pull over and wait it out, and you get to find out why I don't like this stretch of road." He tried to make it light. It didn't come out light. His hands were tight on the wheel, and his eyes kept going to the mirror. "Claire, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not argue." "Okay. When I say so, not now, but when I say so, I need you to put your seatbelt as tight as it goes, and put both feet flat on the floor and your hands in your lap, and just trust me. Whatever it does, whatever it feels like, I've driven this road 200 times and worse than this. I know this truck. I know this grade. Just trust me, and don't grab the wheel, and don't scream. Screaming makes me flinch, and I can't flinch up here. Can you do that?" Claire looked at him, at the set of his jaw, the white of his knuckles, the fear he was holding down flat under 9 years of learning to run on nothing, and she reached over and put her hand on his thigh, steady grounding. "I trust you," she said. "I got in the truck, didn't I? I already decided I trust you. This is just the part where I find out I meant it." The first rain hit the windshield like thrown gravel, and Ethan Walker, who had spent 3 years behind glass, and 2 years across a counter, and 1 whole day, finally learning to want things out loud, took a breath the way they'd taught him in Through the Nosehold, let it go, and he drove them both up into the storm. The rain came down so hard, the wipers couldn't keep ahead of it, throwing the road into a gray blur, and Ethan had both hands locked on the wheel, and his whole body leaned forward, like he could see better by being closer to the glass. "Talk to me," Claire said. Her voice was tight but steady. She was doing exactly what he'd asked, belt-tight feet, flat hands in her lap, but her knuckles had gone white too. "Don't go quiet on me. I need to hear your voice or I'm gonna start imagining things. We're okay." He downshifted and the engine dropped into a low growl that Claire felt in her teeth. "I'm bleeding off the brakes on a grade like this. Brakes'll fade, and then you've got nothing. So I let the engine hold us back. It's gonna get loud, and it's gonna feel like we're going too fast, and we're not. That's just how it sounds. You still with me?" "Still with you. Good girl." He said it without thinking the way he'd say it to Lily, and if the moment had been any lighter, she'd have given him grief for it, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The wind hit them broadside coming around a bend, and the whole truck shuddered and drifted a foot toward the yellow line before Ethan brought it back, and Claire made a sound low in her throat and clamped her mouth shut on it. "That's the wind," he said fast. "Calm the way you talk somebody down. That's just the wind pushing on the box. It looks big and empty, and the wind grabs it like a sail. I've got it. I've got it, Claire. It didn't get us, did it? We're still between the lines." "We're still between the lines," she repeated like a prayer. "Say it again." "We're still between the lines." "There you go." And that was when the temperature gauge started to climb. He saw it before she did. His eyes flicking to the dash on instinct. 20 years of instinct. And something in his face changed, went from tight controlled to something worse, something still. And Claire had spent 2 years reading that face across a counter, and she caught the change before he could hide it. "What? What just happened? Your face just did a thing." "Nothing. Watching the gauges. Ethan Walker, we are on the side of a mountain in a storm, and you promised me the truth all week. Don't you dare start lying to me now. What's wrong?" He didn't answer for a second. Then, because he'd promised, "Engine's running hot. Too hot. Could be nothing. Could be I lost coolant somewhere back there. Hose could have gone." His jaw worked. "I need to get us off this grade before she overheats, or we're gonna have bigger problems than the rain." "How much further to your pass?" "Too far. I'm not gonna make the pass." He was scanning through the blur, and his voice had gone flat and fast, and working the Navy voice, the one that came out when the thing was real. "There's a pullout. Runaway ramp turnout about a mile down wide gravel. It's built for exactly this. I can get her stopped there and off the road and we wait it out, and I look at the engine when the rain lets up. That's the play. Mile down. Just gotta get us a mile down." "Okay." Claire's voice cracked but held. "Okay, a mile. You've got a mile in you. I've got a mile in me." The truck groaned down the grade engine, screaming to hold it back. Rain hammering wind, slamming the side, the temperature needle climbing and climbing toward the red. And Ethan drove it the way he'd been trained to do, the hard thing 1 second at a time. Don't look at the whole mountain. Look at the next 100 feet, and then the next 100 feet, and then the next. There, he breathed. There it is. Hold on. Not scared, hold on. Just hold on. He brought the truck off the grade and onto the wide gravel turnout in a long, slow arc. Gravel spraying the whole rig, shuddering to a crawl, and then a stop. Nose pointed uphill into the mountain, the way you were supposed to, and he threw it into park and hauled the brake and killed everything but the hazards, and the sudden absence of the engine's scream left a ringing silence with only the rain drumming on the roof. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ethan let out a breath that seemed to empty his whole body, and his hands came off the wheel, and Claire saw them shaking. Really shaking. The hands that had just held them both steady down a mountain in a storm, now that they didn't have to be steady anymore, were trembling like a man's hands in the cold. She unbuckled and turned in her seat, and she didn't say anything. Smart didn't say anything at all. She just took both of his shaking hands in both of hers and held them still. "Hey," she said. "Hey, we're stopped. You did it. We're stopped, and we're between the lines and nothing got us." "Yeah." His voice was wrecked. "Yeah. Your hands are shaking. They do that, after." He tried to pull them back, that old reflex. Hide the thing, don't let anybody see the cost. She didn't let go. It's a stupid thing. They hold steady the whole time you need them steady, and then the second it's over It's not stupid. Claire, look at me. She waited until he did. His eyes were wet, and he was furious about it. She could see him being furious about it. A grown man, a veteran, a father ashamed of his own hands. "You held us steady when it counted. You can shake now. That's not weakness, that's the toll. That's what it costs to be the guy who holds steady. Somebody's got to pay it, and it's always you, and you pay it alone in the dark where nobody sees." She tightened her grip. "Well, I see. I'm right here and I see. So shake all you want. I've got your hands." And Ethan Walker, who had not let another adult hold him up in 3 years, who had put on the coat and zipped it up every single morning, and done the day alone, sat in the cab of his truck on the side of a mountain, and let a woman hold his shaking hands until they stopped, and he didn't apologize for it, and that was the most he'd surrendered to another living soul since he was a boy. They sat like that a long time. The rain didn't let up, but it eased, went from violence to just weather, a steady gray drumming. "I have to tell you something," she said finally, still holding his hands. "And I've been trying to figure out how all week, and I think the mountain just decided for me, because I about died back there, and I'm not going to sit on it anymore." "Okay, I almost didn't come." She said it in a rush. "Thursday morning. I told you I sat in the parking lot 40 minutes talking myself out of it, and that was true, but it wasn't nerves, Ethan. It wasn't just cold feet. I had my hand on the gear shift to leave, 3 times. I had it in reverse." He went very still. "Why?" "Because I've done this before." She looked down at their hands. "I've stepped into a man's life before, decided he was worth it, made myself part of his world. And you already know how that ended. He made me small until I disappeared, and then he told me the disappearing was my fault for being too much." She lifted her eyes. "And I sat in that parking lot at 4 in the morning, and I thought, what if I do it again? What if I climb into this truck and give this man everything? And a year from now, I'm sitting in another hospital at 2 a.m., by myself, finding out he's just Kevin with a nicer face. What if I've learned nothing? What if I'm the kind of woman who keeps handing her whole self to men who set it down and walk away? I'm not," he started. "Let me finish, please, because this is the part I'm actually scared of." She took a breath. "What scares me isn't the road, Ethan. Watching you drive us down that mountain, that didn't scare me. I trusted you. I told you I would, and I meant it. What scares me is this. What happens the first time I want something you can't give me? What happens the first time I'm the too much one in your life? What happens the day I ask you to choose between your daughter and me, or your job and me, or your walls and me? Because it'll happen. It always happens. Life makes you choose, and you look at me the way Rachel probably wanted you to look at her, and I become one more person, asking you to be somebody you're not." Her voice broke wide open. "I'm not afraid you'll leave me. I'm afraid I'll turn into a person who makes you want to. I'm afraid I'll be the thing that makes your life harder, instead of the thing that makes it bearable. That's the fear. That's the whole fear. I could handle the storm. I don't know if I can handle being your storm. The rain came down. Ethan didn't answer right away, and she started to pull her hands back, started to fold in on herself, the way she must have learned to do with Kevin, make herself smaller. Take it back, don't be too much. He caught her hands before they got away. Claire. He turned in the seat to face her fully, and there was nothing behind. Glass was gone. The storm had taken it. Look at me. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the way you made me hear you on that shoulder. Not brace against it. Actually hear it. Okay. I spent 9 years protecting people. That was the whole job. Stand between the thing and the people and take whatever comes so they don't have to. And I was good at it. And then I came home, and I kept doing it, protecting Rachel, by not burdening her with what was in my head, protecting Lily by keeping my face steady, so she'd think the world was safe, protecting you by keeping a counter between us, so I could never hurt you, and you could never leave me. I made a whole life out of protecting everybody by keeping them at arm's length. He shook his head, and there was something breaking loose in him, something that had been stuck a long, long time. And you know what it got me? It got me a wife who left because she said living with me was like living alone. It got me a daughter who asks my sister why I'm sad, even when I'm smiling. It got me 2 years across a counter from the best thing in my week, close enough to touch, never touching. My whole life, Claire. I protected everybody so well I ended up completely alone. Ethan, I'm not done. His hands tightened on hers. You're scared you'll turn into my storm. Here's the thing you don't understand yet, and it took me a mountain to understand it too. I don't want somebody who makes my life easy. I've had easy. Easy as a man behind glass. Easy as a counter between us. Easy as never risking a single thing, so nothing can ever hurt. I've been living easy for 3 years, and easy is another word for dead. He was crying now too, and he didn't try to stop it. I want somebody who's in the truck. That's it. That's the whole thing I want. I want somebody who's in the truck when the storm comes, who'll ask me hard questions, and hold my hands when they shake and tell me my coffee's terrible. And yeah, someday you're gonna want something I can't give, and we're gonna have to fight it out, and someday I'm gonna disappoint you, and someday you're gonna disappoint me. But Claire, that's not the storm. That's just weather. 2 people who love each other having weather. Kevin didn't leave because you were too much. Kevin left because he wanted the parking lot and you wanted the truck. That's the only thing that was ever wrong. You kept trying to give your whole self to men who wanted somebody smaller. And I don't want you smaller. I want the whole, I want all of it. The class and the trip and the little cafe you dream about and the too much and the hard questions and the hands that reach across the console. I want all of it. That's what I couldn't say for 2 years. I want the whole storm. Claire Bennett put both hands over her face and cried the way you cry when something you'd given up on turns out to be real after all. And Ethan pulled her across the console into his chest. Both of them tangled up in the seatbelt and the gear shift, the rain drumming on the roof, and he held her the way she'd held his hand steady, not fixing anything just there. I'm scared, she said into his shirt. I know, me too. I've been scared since you asked me if I was really asking or just afraid of the answer. I've been scared the whole way. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. But I'm doing it scared. That's the difference. That's the thing Dana told me, my sister. She said I didn't have to be brave enough for the whole thing. I just had to be brave enough to leave one door unlocked and see who showed up. And you showed up. So now I figure we do the rest of it the same way. Scared together, one unlocked door at a time. That's very wise for a man who thought calling me at 7 a.m. was too forward. He laughed and she laughed, wet and shaking, and the worst of it broke the way a fever breaks and left them both wrung out and lighter. They sat wrapped up together until the rain finally slowed to a drizzle and then to nothing, and a thin, watery light started to come through the clouds, and Ethan sat up and wiped his face with the heel of his hand and looked almost embarrassed at the fogged-up windshield. I should look at the engine, he said, while there's light. Is it bad, the hot thing, the coolant? Dunno till I look. If it's a hose, I can maybe patch it enough to limp to a shop. If it's worse... He shrugged. Then we're getting a room in whatever town's closest and calling a tow in the morning, and I'm blowing my whole schedule, and the company's going to be unhappy with me. He looked at her. And I find I don't care even a little bit. He popped the hood and climbed down into the wet, and Claire climbed down after him and stood there in the cold, holding a flashlight from the glove box, while he leaned into the engine, and it was she realized, standing on the side of a mountain, holding a light for a man with grease on his hands. It was the most married she'd felt in her entire life, and they weren't anything close to married, and the thought both terrified her and warmed her straight through. "Hose," he grunted from somewhere in the engine. "Split hose, old one. I should have caught it." He came up with a black smear across his cheek. "Good news is, I carry spares and tape for exactly this. Bad news is, it's a knucklebutt in the wet, and it's gonna take me an hour, and I'm gonna say some words your 7-year-old shouldn't hear." "Lily's not here." "You're here. I've worked a diner kitchen for 11 years, Ethan. You cannot say a word I haven't heard a line cook scream during a Sunday brunch rush." She handed him the flashlight to hold in his teeth and reached for the toolbox. "Tell me what to hand you. I'm not standing here being decorative while you fix a truck. I want to know how this works too. Your whole life, remember, I'm not just visiting." And something about that "I'm not just visiting" made him go still for a second in the guts of the engine, and then he took the light out of his mouth and looked at her over the fender, and he said quiet, "You know that's the thing, right? That's the whole thing you just said." "What thing?" "Everybody else who ever came near my life came to visit. Rachel visited the parts she liked and left when she saw the rest. People at the cafe visit how you holding up, Ethan. You need anything visiting from a safe distance ready to leave. Even I visit my own life half the time, put on the coat, do the day clock out." He shook his head slowly. "And you just climbed down into the mud on the side of a mountain and asked me to teach you how the truck works because you're not visiting. You're moving in. To the whole thing. Even the greasy broke-down parts. Well?" Claire's chin came up, but her eyes were wet again. "Somebody had to. You've been living there alone long enough. Place was a mess." She pressed a wrench into his hand. "Now fix your truck, sailor. It's getting dark and I'm cold and I want a terrible motel with a working heater, and I want to hear the rest of the Navy stories, the ones you didn't tell me in Missouri, the real ones, the ones you've never told anybody." He looked at the wrench in his hand. He looked at her. "Those aren't good stories, Claire. I didn't ask for good ones. I asked for real ones. There's a difference, and you know it because you spent 2 years telling me nothing but the good ones." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You want somebody in the truck. Then I get the real stories. That's the deal. In the truck means all of it, even the parts that don't have a nice ending. Especially those." He turned back to the engine, and he worked in silence for a minute. The split hose and the wet and the fading light, and then still working. Not looking at her in a voice she'd never heard him use, he started to talk. He told her a real one. The first real one. The kind he'd never told Rachel, never told his sister, never told anybody, the kind that lived behind the glass and made him a ghost. A night years ago, a friend who didn't come home, a thing he'd had to do, and a thing he hadn't been able to do, and the way he'd carried it every single day since like a stone sewn into his chest. Claire didn't say anything while he told it. She just held the light steady and let him talk, and when his voice broke in the middle of it, she didn't rush to fill the silence. She just moved a step closer, so her shoulder pressed against his arm so he'd know she was still there, still in the truck, not flinching, not visiting. And when he finished, when the whole ugly true thing was out of him and lying there in the cold between them, he braced for it. She felt him brace. 3 years of glass, 9 years of learning not to need a whole life of waiting for the person to see the real thing and back away. He'd finally shown somebody the stone in his chest, and now he waited the way he'd waited his whole life for them to leave. She didn't leave. She set the flashlight down on the fender, its beam pointing up into the drizzle, and she took his greasy face in both her hands and made him look at her, and she said, "Thank you." "For what?" he managed. "For letting me see it. You've been carrying that by yourself for how long?" "Long time." "Well, you're not carrying it by yourself anymore. That's what I climbed in the truck for. I'll help you carry it. You don't even have to say anything. You don't have to fix it. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm just going to know about it, so you're not the only one who does. That's all." That's what it means when somebody actually moves in instead of visiting. They know where you keep the heavy things, and they help you carry them. Her thumbs moved on his cheekbones, smearing the grease, and she didn't care. You held my hands when they were shaking. Now I'm holding yours. That's the deal, sailor. That's the whole deal. Nobody carries it alone anymore. Not you, not me, not ever again. Ethan Walker stood on the side of a mountain in the last gray light, with a busted hose in one hand and a wrench in the other, and a woman holding his grease-smeared face, and he understood all at once and completely that the thing he'd spent 3 years terrified of being fully known and still left had just been proven a lie. She knew now. She knew the worst of it, the thing behind the glass, the stone in his chest. And she wasn't leaving. She was standing closer. He set down the wrench. He put his arms around her, grease and all, and he held her against him in the cold and the drizzle with the flashlight beam pointing up into the dark. And neither of them said anything for a long time, because there wasn't anything left that needed saying. Then into her hair he whispered, "I never finished fixing the hose." She laughed against his chest. "Then finish fixing the hose, you idiot. I really do want that motel with the working heater." He laughed too and let her go and picked the wrench back up and went back to work. But different now, lighter, a man who'd set something down after carrying it too long. And Claire held the light and handed him the tape when he asked, and neither of them was the same as they'd been when the storm started, because you can't hold somebody's shaking hands and show somebody the stone in your chest and stay the same afterward. The storm hadn't just been weather. The storm had been the thing that finally broke the glass. He got the hose patched as full dark came down. He got them limping off the mountain and into the first town with a lit-up motel sign, and he got 2 rooms out of old habit, and then stood at her door with the key in his hand, and she looked at the 2 keys and then at him and shook her head. "1 room," she said. "Not, I don't mean—" She flushed. "I mean, I don't want to be alone tonight, and I don't think you should be either after all that. So 1 room, 2 beds, and you tell me the rest of the Navy stories till I fall asleep. And in the morning we call a real shop and get your hose done right, and we finish this trip." Okay. Can a man who buys 2 rooms out of respect handle 1 room out of just not wanting to be alone? Ethan looked at the keys in his hand. He'd spent 3 years being alone. He'd gotten so good at it, he'd almost convinced himself he preferred it. And here was a woman who'd been in his truck through a storm, who knew the stone in his chest, asking him plainly to just not be alone tonight. He put 1 key back in his pocket. 1 room, he said. 2 beds. 2 beds, she agreed, and there was something in her small smile that said she knew exactly how big a thing he'd just done, choosing not to be alone, and how hard it had been, and how much it meant. They went in out of the cold. And somewhere behind them on the mountain, the storm that had nearly killed them both moved off east into the dark, having done the one thing no amount of coffee across a counter had managed to do. In 2 long years, it had stopped them both from running long enough to finally choose each other. They finished the trip 3 days later, and it was the strangest, best 3 days of Ethan Walker's adult life, precisely because nothing dramatic happened in them at all. That was the thing he couldn't get over. After the mountain, after the storm, and the shaking hands, and the stone in his chest, laid out in the cold, he'd braced for the crash. That was how it always went. In his experience, you have the big fear. You let somebody all the way in, and then a day or 2 later, the fear comes back with reinforcements, and you find a reason to pull the walls up higher than before. He'd spent the morning after the motel waiting for it. Waiting for her to go quiet, or for himself to go quiet. Waiting for the counter to reassemble itself in the air between them. It never came. They got the hose fixed right at a shop in the next town, and they delivered his load a day late to a dispatcher who chewed him out, and then hearing something new in Ethan's voice softened and said, "Just don't make a habit of it." And they turned the empty truck east and drove home, and the whole way back. Claire gave him grief about his music and made him tell her more real stories, the smaller ones now, the ones that weren't stones, just pieces of a life. His boot camp bunkmate, who snored like a chainsaw. The first time he held Lily. The recipe for the one thing he could actually cook. And Ethan found that a life told out loud to somebody who wanted to hear it stopped being a thing that happened to him and started being a thing that belonged to him. You're different. Claire said somewhere in Oklahoma, watching him. Different how? When we left, you drove like you were bracing for a hit. Both hands, shoulders up around your ears. Now you drive like the truck's yours. She smiled. Like your life's yours. I don't know how to say it better than that. He thought about it. It didn't used to be, he said finally. Mine. I was just keeping it running for other people. Lily, the company, Rachel back when. I was the guy who kept the thing running. He glanced at her. You made it mine. I don't know how you did that in 7 days, but you did. I didn't do anything. I just got in the truck. Yeah, he said. That was the whole thing. That was everything. But here is where the story could have gone the easy way and didn't, because Ethan Walker had learned something on that mountain that a lesser man wouldn't have, and he'd been turning it over the whole drive home. He pulled into a rest area outside Tulsa, and he put it in park, and he turned to her with a look she'd started to recognize as I'm about to say a hard, true thing, and I'm making myself do it. I don't want to rush this, he said. Claire went still. Okay. No, not like that. I'm not God. I'm bad at this. He scrubbed a hand down his face. I mean the opposite of what that sounds like. I've got you in this truck, and this week's been the best week of my life, and every part of me wants to just keep you. Drive home and move you into the house, and never let the counter come back. That's what I want. Right now. Today. But I've got a 7-year-old who already lost one woman she loved, and I'm not going to do to Lily what got done to me. His jaw worked. Rachel didn't leave slow, Claire. She left slow, and then all at once, and Lily was 5, and she couldn't understand why the person who read to her every night just stopped being there. And it did something to her. She still does this thing where she asks me 3 times if I'm coming back before a run. 3 times. Same 3 questions. Because some part of her is still checking whether people come back. He shook his head. So I can't just drive you into her life on the high of one good week and find out in 3 months that we were running on adrenaline and a storm. Because it won't be me who pays for that. It'll be Lily, again. Claire was quiet a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. You just did the thing, she said softly. What thing? The thing you were scared you couldn't do. You wanted something, you wanted to keep me, and instead of grabbing it, you thought about who it might cost, and you chose the harder, slower, more loving thing. That's not you being a ghost, Ethan. That's you being the best kind of father. Her eyes were wet. And for the record, a man who tells the woman he's crazy about, let's slow down for my daughter's sake, is about 1,000 times more attractive than a man who says, let's move in together tonight. You just made me more sure, not less. You understand that. So you're not? I'm not going anywhere. I told you on the mountain. I'm in the truck. In the truck means I can wait for the parts that need waiting. Slow is fine. Slow I can do. Slow means you're taking it seriously. She squeezed his hand. But Ethan, slow doesn't mean the counter comes back. I'm not going back to being the woman you talked to for 2 years and never touch. Slow means we do this on purpose carefully, with Lily at the center of it. It doesn't mean we do this at arm's length. There's a difference, and I need you to hold on to it because I know you. And the second things get scary, you're gonna reach for that counter like a security blanket. I know, he admitted. I already feel myself reaching for it. Then let me hold the other end of your hand every time you do, she said. That's the deal. You feel the walls coming up, you tell me, and I'll be right there on the other side going, nope, not this time, sailor, I see you. He laughed, wet and grateful. Deal. And that was how they did it. Not the movie way, not the drive off into the sunset way. They did it the hard, slow, real way. And the story of the months that followed is the story of 100 small, brave choices, instead of one big dramatic one. The first was the cafe. He brought her home, and the very next Saturday, he brought Lily in, and he sat at the counter. His counter, the same stool, and he watched his daughter climb up on the tall one beside him, and Claire came around from behind the register wiping her hands on her apron, and Lily's whole face lit up like Christmas. Miss Claire, Daddy said you'd teach me the milk drawings, the heart ones. He promised on the phone from the trip. And Claire looked at Ethan over Lily's head, one eyebrow up from the trip. Huh. And Ethan felt his ears hot, because he hadn't told her that Lily knew, Hadn't told her about the phone call from the neon-lit parking lot where he'd said, "Yeah, baby, Miss Claire's on the trip." "He did promise," Claire said, coming around the counter. "And I keep my promises. Come on, Tiny. Wash your hands first. That's the rule. Then I'll show you how to pour a heart. But I'm warning you now, it takes about 100 tries, and your first 99 look like blobs." "I don't mind blobs," Lily said seriously, already scrambling for the sink. Ethan watched them, his daughter on a step stool at the espresso machine, Claire's hand over her small one guiding the pitcher. Slow, Tiny, slow. Let it fall there. See that? That's the start of a heart. And Walt, still in his green cap, lowered his newspaper, 2 stools down, and caught Ethan's eye, and gave him a single slow nod, the nod of a man who'd called it months ago, and had the grace not to say "I told you so" out loud. "You said the thing," Walt said quietly just for Ethan. "Finally. Took you long enough. I was starting to think I'd die at this counter before you two figured it out." "Eat your eggs, Walt," Ethan said, but he was smiling, and Walt smiled too, and went back to his paper. It wasn't all milk drawings, because slow and real means you hit the hard parts and they hit them. There was the night 3 weeks when Lily, testing the way kids test, looked across the dinner table, where Claire was passing the potatoes like she belonged there, and said flat and cold, "You're not my mom." Just to see what would happen, just to find the edges of this new thing and check if they held. Ethan opened his mouth to correct her, to send her to her room, some reflex of a father who couldn't stand to see anybody hurt. "Claire," and Claire caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of her head. "Let me." "You're right," Claire said, setting down the potatoes. "I'm not your mom. I'm not trying to be your mom. You've already got a mom. Nobody's ever gonna take her spot. That spot's hers. It stays hers forever." She said it easy, no wobble in it. "I'm something else. I don't even have a good word for it yet. I'm a person who thinks you're pretty great and who likes being around you and your dad. That's all. You don't have to call me anything you don't want to. You don't have to like me on any particular schedule. And if you're ever mad about any of it, you can tell me you wish it was just you and your dad, and I won't fall apart, and I won't leave, and I won't make you feel bad for saying it. Okay." Lily stared at her, the test not going the way tests usually went. "Okay," she said, finally small. And then, a minute later, in the tiny voice of a kid handing over the real question under the test, "Are you gonna leave?" Like after a while, people leave after a while. The table went quiet. Ethan's throat closed up. Claire didn't rush it. She looked at Lily, this 7-year-old who checked 3 times if her dad was coming back before every trip. This little girl who'd learned at 5 that the people who read to you at night could just stop. And Claire understood in that second that she wasn't being tested at all. She was being asked the only question that mattered. "I can't promise you I'll never make you mad," Claire said carefully. "I can't promise your dad, and I will never argue. Grown-ups argue. Sometimes that's normal. It doesn't mean anything bad. But I can promise you one thing, and I want you to really hear it." She leaned in. "I don't leave. That's not a thing I do. I had a mom I loved, and I stayed with her till the end. I've got a cafe, and I've shown up to open it every single morning for 6 years. Ask Walt. Ask anybody. When I decide I'm in on something, I'm in all the way, and I've decided I'm in on you and your dad. So no, I'm not gonna leave. Not after a while. Not ever. You can check as many times as you need to. You can ask me every single day if you want, and I'll answer every single day same answer: no, I don't leave." Lily looked at her for a long, long moment. Then she picked her fork back up and said to her potatoes, "Okay, can you teach me the leaf one next time? Not just the heart. Zoe's mom can't even do the heart, and I already did a heart." And just like that, it was over, and the tightness went out of Ethan's chest so fast it left him dizzy and under the table. Claire found his hand and squeezed it, and he squeezed back, and neither of them said anything, because a 7-year-old was busy telling them about Zoe's mom's inferior latte art. And that was right then the most important thing in the world. Later that night, after Lily was down, Ethan found Claire on the back porch in the cold, and he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside her. "You were incredible in there," he said. I'd have gotten it wrong. I'd have corrected her or gotten hurt or made it a thing. You gave her the truth and let her keep her mom's spot and told her you don't leave. How'd you know to do that? Because I was her, Claire said simply. My dad left when I was 6, and nobody ever once sat me down and told me it wasn't my fault and that the people staying were gonna stay. I just had to figure it out from watching who came back and who didn't. Nobody ever just said the words out loud to me. I don't leave. She pulled the blanket tighter. So I said them to her. Because somebody should have said them to me, and nobody did, and I'll be damned if that kid grows up checking 3 times whether people come back. Ethan stood there in the cold and looked at this woman and felt something in his chest that was bigger and quieter than the storm on the mountain, something without any fear left in it at all. "Marry me," he said. Claire went absolutely still. "What? I know we said slow. I know it's been 11 weeks, and I know there's supposed to be a ring and a plan, and I've got neither. I've got a blanket and a cold porch." He turned to face her, and his voice was shaking, but not from fear, from the opposite of fear. "But I just watched you give my daughter the exact thing you needed at 6 and never got. And I thought I'm not going to be another person who's too slow to say the true thing out loud. I did that for 2 years across a counter. I'm done being slow with the true things. So not tonight, not this month, we can be as slow as you want on the doing of it. But I want you to know where I'm headed. I'm headed at you. All the way. For the rest of it. So marry me. Someday. Whenever you're ready. I just need you to know that's where I'm going so you can decide if you're coming." Claire Bennett stood on a cold back porch wrapped in a blanket and looked at the man she'd almost driven away from 3 times in a parking lot at 4 in the morning, and she started to laugh, and then she started to cry, and then she did both at once. "You giant idiot," she said. "You beautiful backwards giant idiot. You buy 2 motel rooms out of respect, and then you propose on a porch with no ring after 11 weeks. Is that a— Yes." She grabbed the front of his shirt in both fists. "Yes, someday whenever I don't care about the ring, I never cared about the ring. Yes, I'm coming. I've been coming since I got in the truck. Yes." He kissed her on the back porch in the cold, and it wasn't the careful cheek kiss from the motel doorway. It was the whole thing. 2 years of counter, and 1 week of storm, and 11 weeks of slow and real all at once. And when they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "But we're still telling Lily together. And we're still going slow on the doing of it. And you're still gonna feel the walls come up sometimes and reach for that counter, and I'm still gonna be on the other end of your hand every time going." "Nope, not this time, sailor, I see you," he finished. "You're learning." They told Lily the next morning, both of them at the kitchen table, the 2 of them holding hands, and a 7-year-old squinting suspiciously at them over her cereal. "So," Ethan started, "Claire and I have something we want to—" "Are you getting married?" Lily said. Both adults froze. "How did you—" Zoe said when grown-ups hold hands at breakfast, and both look scared. "It means they're getting married." Lily took a bite of cereal, unbothered. "Are you getting married?" "Someday," Ethan managed. "We wanted to ask how you'd feel about— Do I get to be in it?" Zoe was in her aunt's, and she got to throw flowers and wear a dress that spun. Lily looked up, and for 1 second the unbothered kid slipped, and the real question showed through, the same one from the potatoes, the one under all the others. And Claire, would she'd live here for real? Not just visiting because she said she doesn't leave. She said it at dinner. She said she doesn't leave. "For real," Claire said. "Not visiting. I told you, Tiny, I don't leave. I meant it. Getting married is just the grown-up way of promising it out loud in front of everybody, so I can never take it back. That's all a wedding is. It's me saying I don't leave so loud that the whole town hears it." Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Can I throw the flowers?" "You can throw the flowers." "Can my dress spin?" "Your dress will spin so hard you'll get dizzy." "Okay." Lily went back to her cereal decision, rendered world realigned. Then, without looking up so casual, it broke both their hearts clean in half. "Good. I didn't want you to leave either. I already checked twice and you kept saying no, so I figured." And Ethan Walker had to get up and go stand at the kitchen sink with his back to the table for a minute, gripping the edge of the counter. The kitchen counter. The same room. The same table where a marriage had ended 3 years ago, because his eyes had gone hot, and he didn't want his daughter to see, except that Claire came up behind him and put her hand flat on his back over the stone that used to live in his chest. And she didn't say anything. She just stood there with him while he pulled it together, one hand on his back, letting him know he wasn't standing at that sink alone. He turned around. Lily was watching them cereal spoon halfway up, that quick, worried look flickering again. "Daddy, why are you sad?" And here was the moment, the exact moment his sister had warned him about at another table. Months ago, she asks me, "Why you're sad, even when you're smiling?" You're teaching her, love's a thing you brace against, and Ethan Walker looked at his daughter, and for the first time in her whole life, told her the true thing instead of the steady-faced protective thing. "I'm not sad, monkey," he said, and his voice cracked and he let it. "I'm happy. This is what happy looks like when you waited a real long time for it. Sometimes it comes out your eyes. It's okay. It's a good thing. Come here." And Lily climbed down off her stool and crossed the kitchen, and Ethan scooped her up, and Claire wrapped her arms around both of them, and the three of them stood in the middle of the kitchen, where a family had once fallen apart and became without any ceremony at all. A new one. Not a replacement for the old one. Not a patch over the hole, but a whole new thing built slow and on purpose, and out in the open, where nobody had to guess. The wedding came the following fall. Small. The cafe after hours, because where else? Walt gave a toast in his green cap that started as roasting Ethan for taking 2 years to buy a cup of coffee from the right angle, and ended with the old mechanic's voice going rough, as he said he'd watched a lot of people come and go through that cafe in 30 years, and he'd never seen two people more clearly built to be in each other's passenger seat, and he had to sit down fast after that and pretend it was his knees. Dana came down from Ohio and cried through the whole thing and told Claire, gripping her hands, "You have no idea what you did. You got my brother back. He's been gone since he was 27, and you drove out to a truck at 4 in the morning and brought him home. I don't know how to thank a person for that." And Lily threw the flowers, and her dress spun so hard she got dizzy and had to sit down in the middle of the aisle, and nobody minded. And it was the best wedding anybody there had ever been to, precisely because it wasn't trying to be anything but true. That night after, when the cafe had emptied out, and Lily was asleep on 2 pushed-together chairs in her spun-out dress, Ethan and Claire sat at the counter, his stool her side of the register with the lights low, and 2 cups of the terrible coffee he'd learned to make. And Claire looked at the seat where he'd sat 6 mornings a week for 2 years and shook her head. "2 years," she said. "You sat right there for 2 years. I know. You could have just said something. I know. We could have had 2 more years. I know." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the wood, the old habit, and then he stopped himself and reached over and took her hand instead. "But I don't think I'd have been ready 2 years ago. I don't think I could have done the mountain 2 years ago. I think I needed to be exactly as scared and exactly as tired and exactly as done, being alone as I was that Thursday morning when I told you not to show up and you showed up anyway." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "The joke had to be the joke first. I had to try one more time to hide behind the punchline. And you had to be the one person on earth who wouldn't laugh, who'd push the door instead of shutting it and ask me if I was actually asking or just afraid of the answer. And you didn't have an answer that night." "I didn't have an answer that night," he agreed. "I've got one now." "Yeah. What is it?" Ethan Walker looked at his wife across the counter, where he'd loved her silently for 2 years in the cafe, where his daughter was asleep in a spinning dress in a life that was finally completely on purpose his. "I was actually asking," he said. "The whole time, from the very first joke. I was always actually asking. I was just too scared to hear you say yes." Claire came around the counter around it the way she had 100 times. Except this time, there'd never be a counter between them again, and she sat down on his knee and put her arms around his neck. "Well," she said, "ask me one more time, for the road. And this time I'll say it plain so there's no more guessing from either of us ever again." And he asked her. Quiet in the empty cafe in the low light, the same words wrapped around 2 years and a mountain and a whole new family asleep in a spinning dress. "Come with me, not for a week, for the rest of it. And Claire Bennett, who had once stood in a gravel lot before dawn with a bag in her hand, and 3 brave words leaned her forehead against his and gave him the answer she'd been trying to give him all along. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I was always ready. I was just waiting for you to stop being afraid to hear it." The thing about a good marriage, Ethan learned, is that it doesn't end at the wedding the way the stories say. It just starts there. The wedding is the door. The living is everything on the other side of it, and most of the living isn't spinning dresses and toasts in green caps. Most of the living is early mornings and terrible coffee, and a 7-year-old, then 8, then 9, growing up in a house where for once, nobody was behind glass. The first year they kept the cafe, and Ethan kept driving, and they built their days around the seams of both. He took shorter runs now when he could turn down the cross-country hauls that used to keep him gone a week at a time, because he'd finally figured out what all that disappearing had really been. Not the job. Never really the job, but a man staying in motion, so he'd never have to sit still in a life that hurt to sit still in. Now the life didn't hurt to sit still in. Now he wanted to be home. "You're turning down the long ones," his dispatcher said, halfway suspicious the first time Ethan passed on a haul that would have paid double. "That's not like you. You used to take every mile we threw at you. You used to fight the other guys for 'em." "Yeah, well?" Ethan shifted the phone to his other ear, watching through the cafe window where Claire was teaching Lily to work the register. The two of them heads down over the drawer, Lily counting change out loud with her tongue between her teeth. "I used to have a reason to want to be gone. I don't anymore." There was a pause on the line. Then the dispatcher, a gruff old road dog named Sal, who'd been routing trucks since before Ethan enlisted, said something Ethan didn't expect. "Good for you, Walker. Took most of us 3 divorces to figure that out. You did it in 1. A beat. I'll send the short ones your way. Go home to your girls." His girls. Ethan stood there a second with the phone in his hand after the call ended, turning the words over. His girls. He'd spent so many years being one man alone with a job and a wall and a stone in his chest. And now, without quite being able to say when it happened, he'd become a man with girls to go home to. The change was so complete, he sometimes forgot to be amazed by it, and then a moment like this would catch him, and he'd have to stop and let it land, that this was his life, now that he got to keep it. He went inside. Lily looked up from the register. "Daddy, I counted the whole drawer, and I was only off by a dime." "Only a dime. Better than me." He came around the counter and kissed the top of her head, then Claire's cheek. "Sal's giving me the short runs. I'll be home most nights now." Claire didn't say anything big about it. That was one of the 1,000 things he loved about her. She knew the size of a thing without making a speech over it. She just looked at him, and something passed between them, and she said, "Good. Lily's got a spelling test Thursday, and I'm no good at the tricky ones. You're better at the tricky ones." And that was that, and it was everything. That was the shape of the years mostly. Small. Undramatic. The kind of life that doesn't make a story because it's too busy being a good one. But there was one more storm coming, because there always is, and this one didn't come off a mountain. It came in the spring of the 3rd year in a phone call. The kind of phone call everybody dreads and nobody's ready for. Rachel, Lily's mother. The woman who'd left slow, and then all at once who'd faded like a photograph in a window. Rachel was sick. Bad sick. The kind with a timeline on it. And she'd called Ethan, not Lily, because whatever else Rachel was, she wasn't cruel, and she wanted to know how to do this right for a daughter she'd spent 4 years being a Sunday phone call to. Ethan took the call on the back porch, the same porch where he'd proposed with a blanket and no ring, and when it ended, he sat down hard on the steps and put his head in his hands, and that was how Claire found him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She sat down beside him on the cold step and put her hand on his back over the place where the stone used to be, and she waited. "That was Rachel," he said finally. "I gathered. She's sick. It's Claire. It's bad. Months maybe. And she wants to see Lily. Wants to try to be something to her before. After 4 years of Sunday phone calls, she wants to show up, and I don't..." His voice broke. "How do I do this? How do I tell a 9-year-old her mom's dying? How do I let Rachel back in after and how do I keep Lily from getting her heart broke all over again when the person who left is gonna leave for good this time and there's no—" He stopped. He couldn't finish it. And here was the moment where the old Ethan the ghost, the man behind glass, would have done what he always did. Gone quiet. Gone hard. Handled it. Alone, protected everybody by keeping the whole crushing weight of it locked in his own chest. And Claire felt him start to. She felt him start to pull inward, felt the old reflex fire, felt him reach for the counter that lived somewhere inside him, still the safe distance, "I'll carry this one myself." "Nope," she said quietly. "Not this time, sailor. I see you." He let out a breath that was half a laugh and half a sob. "There it is," he said. "You said you'd say it. I said I'd say it every time. This is a time." She turned him toward her. "We're not doing this the old way. You don't carry this one alone. This isn't yours to carry alone. This is a family thing now, and I'm the family, so I'm carrying it with you whether you like it or not. Now talk to me. All of it." What did she say? What does she want? What are you scared of? Out loud. Where I can help. So he told her all of it out loud on the cold step, and they carried it together, and over the weeks that followed, they did the hardest, most gracious thing either of them had ever done. They let Rachel back in. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. There were nights Ethan lay awake, furious that Rachel got to come back now at the end and be the tragic mother when she'd been a phone call for 4 years, furious that Lily would love her and lose her all over again. And Claire let him be furious, didn't try to talk him out of it, just held the other end of it. But then there were the afternoons. Rachel came to the house thin and gray and trying so hard, sitting on the floor with Lily doing a puzzle, and Ethan would watch from the kitchen, and his fury would drain out of him, because whatever Rachel had done or failed to do, she was Lily's mother, and she was dying, and she was trying to give her daughter something to hold on to after. And Claire. This was the part Ethan never got over, the part that told him more about the woman he'd married than the mountain ever had. Claire made room. She had every reason not to. Rachel was the ghost of the marriage that broke Ethan, the woman whose leaving taught Lily to check 3 times if people were coming back. A smaller woman would have guarded her territory. Claire opened it. "She's not competition," Claire said, when Ethan asked her, baffled, how she could stand to have Rachel in their home, to make her tea, to leave the two of them alone together. "She's Lily's mom. She's running out of time to be that. What kind of person would I be if I made a dying woman fight me for the last few months she gets with her own kid?" She shook her head. "I don't leave Ethan. I told Lily that at a potato dinner 3 years ago, and I meant it. But loving that kid means loving all of her, and half of her is Rachel. I'm not going to teach her that loving me means she has to give up loving her mom. That's the small person move. That's the Kevin move. Make somebody choose. I'm not doing it." And so, when Rachel died that summer peacefully at the end, with Lily having had a real spring and a real early summer with her mother. Real memories, a real goodbye, instead of a photograph fading in a window. It was Claire who held Lily through this worst of it. Not replacing Rachel. Never replacing Rachel. Just being the one who didn't leave the steady arms, the person who'd promised at a potato dinner, and kept the promise all the way through the one test that could have broken it. At the funeral. Lily 10 now tall for it, holding herself together with a 9-year-old's ferocious dignity, reached up in the middle of it, and took Claire's hand, and then reached over and took Ethan's, and stood between them, holding both. And Ethan looked over his daughter's head at his wife, and understood that the family they'd built slow and on purpose had just passed through the fire that breaks most families, and had come out the other side, not broken, but welded. Later. Much later. After the guests had gone, Lily found Claire in the kitchen and stood in the doorway a while before she spoke. "Claire. Yeah, tiny. Though she wasn't tiny anymore. Thank you for not making me choose." Lily's voice was very careful, very grown-up, the voice of a kid who'd thought hard about how to say a thing. "Zoe's parents got divorced and her stepmom won't even say her real mom's name. And you drove me to see my mom. You made her tea. You cried at her funeral." She swallowed. "You didn't have to do any of that. She's the reason you and Daddy, she's like the whole reason it was hard. And you were nice to her anyway. Why? Claire dried her hands and came and knelt down to Lily's eye level, the way she had at the potato dinner 3 years back. "Because I love you," she said simply. "And you loved her. And loving somebody means you don't make them cut off a piece of their own heart to fit in yours. Your mom's part of you. She always will be. And I'd never ask you to pretend she wasn't, or love her less, or feel bad for missing her." She tucked a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "I've got room for all of it, sweetheart. I've got room for you and your dad, and your mom's memory, and your spelling tests, and your bad moods, and every single thing. That's what it means when somebody moves into your whole life, instead of just visiting the easy parts. I moved into all of it, even this part, especially this part." And Lily, who'd once said, "You're not my mom," across a dinner table, to find the edges, threw her arms around Claire's neck and said muffled fierce, "You kind of are though. You're not instead of her. But you kind of are too. Is that allowed? Can I have both?" "You can have both," Claire said, holding on. "You can always have both. There's no limit on the number of people who get to love you, Tiny. That was never the rule. Somebody told you a lie somewhere along the way, that love runs out if you spread it too thin. It doesn't. It's the one thing in the whole world that only ever grows." Ethan stood in the doorway and watched his daughter and his wife hold each other in the kitchen where his first marriage had ended, and he thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. The ghost. The wall. The joke told across a counter to a woman. He was too scared to actually ask, and he understood finally and completely what that scared man had never been able to see. He'd spent his whole life believing that love was a thing you protected by keeping small, by keeping distance, by never risking the loss. And it was exactly backwards. Love wasn't a thing you protected by making it small. It was a thing that only ever grew when you were brave enough to make it big. Rachel's love for Lily hadn't taken anything from Claire's. Claire's love for Lily hadn't erased Rachel's. Lily loving her dying mother and her living stepmother, both at the same time, all the way, that hadn't divided the girl's heart. It had built it. The years kept coming, the way years do. Lily grew up. Grew tall, grew mouthy in the good way she'd learned from Claire. Grew into a young woman who checked things exactly once now instead of 3 times, because somewhere in there, she'd stopped needing to make sure people were coming back. They came back. That was just the fact of her life now. People came back. Claire didn't leave. It had gone from a promise she checked to a truth she stood on. The cafe did well enough that Claire finally chased the dream she'd once tried to make herself small enough not to want. She opened a second one, a real one, her own from the ground up, and Ethan stood in the empty space with her the week before. It opened, the two of them looking at the bare counters and the boxes of unshelved cups, and he took her hand. 2 years I sat at your counter, he said, and I never once heard you talk about this. The dream. The little cafe of your own. You'd made yourself so small around Kevin, you'd packed it away where even you couldn't find it. I told you about it in the truck, she said. Somewhere in Missouri. It was the first time I'd said it out loud in years. I remember. I told you it wasn't too much. He looked around the space, her name on the lease, her whole self unpacked and taking up room in the world. Look at it now. Look at how much room you take up now. Claire leaned into him. You made it safe to want things again. You know that? That's the thing you did. That's the thing that scared little ghost of a man did that he never knew he had in him. You didn't fix me. You didn't rescue me. You just made it safe. You made a life where wanting things wasn't a leash. Where I could be too much and you'd just say, "Good, be more." You did the same for me, he said. Exactly the same. I was a man who'd forgotten how to need a single thing, and you got in the truck and made it safe to need again. He shook his head slowly. We were the same all along, weren't we? Two people who'd taught ourselves not to want or need, so scared of being too much or needing too much that we near about missed each other entirely. 2 years across a counter. But we didn't miss each other. No, he said. We didn't. You wouldn't let us. You pushed the door instead of shutting it. That one Thursday, you showed up when I told you not to. Walt was gone by then, passed in his sleep, at 80-something in the green cap they buried him in it. But his stool at the first cafe stayed empty by unspoken agreement. and there was a little brass plate on the counter in front of it that Claire had made, and it said only. He knew a stuck gear when he heard one grinding, and regulars who'd never met the man would ask about it, and Claire or Ethan would tell them the story of the old mechanic who'd looked over his newspaper one cold morning and told two terrified people to just say the thing, and how it had taken them a while, but they'd finally said it. And late one evening years on now, Lily grown and gone off to college and calling home on Sundays the way her mother once had, except these Sunday calls were full and easy and long. A daughter who wanted to talk and not a duty being discharged. Ethan and Claire sat at the counter of the first cafe after hours, the lights low, 2 cups of the terrible coffee he'd never gotten any better at making. "You ever think about it," Claire said, "how close we came to not?" "Every day," Ethan said. "Every single day. I think about the version of me that didn't leave the door unlocked that Thursday. The version that told you not to show up and meant it. The version that's still sitting on that stool right there 6 mornings a week, ordering the eggs, tipping too much, talking to you across a counter for another 20 years, and never once." He stopped. "That guy's out there somewhere, in some other life, still a ghost, still behind the glass. And I think about him, and I want to reach through and shake him and tell him, 'She shows up, you idiot. If you can just be brave enough to leave the door unlocked, she shows up.'" Claire reached over and took his hand, the hand that had shaken on the mountain, the hand she'd held still while it did, and she turned it over and pressed her palm flat against his, the way she'd offered it on a gravel shoulder in Missouri a lifetime ago, an open hand and offer. "He doesn't need you to shake him," she said. "He just needs one person who won't laugh at the joke, one person who'll push the door. That's all any of those ghosts need, Ethan. Not somebody to fix them. Not somebody to rescue them. Just one person brave enough to look at a scared man hiding behind a punchline and say, 'Are you actually asking me, or are you just afraid of the answer?'" She smiled. "And then stubborn enough to show up at his truck at 4 in the morning when he says don't." Ethan Walker looked at his wife across the counter where he'd loved her in silence for 2 years in the cafe where it all started in a life that had turned out to be so much larger than the small safe one he'd almost settled for. Outside the town was dark and asleep. Somewhere across the country, a daughter who'd learned that people come back was living a life unafraid to need things. And here in the low light sat the whole of what a scared man had been brave enough one single time to reach for. He'd spent 9 years learning not to need. He'd spent 3 years behind glass. He'd spent 2 years across a counter telling a joke he was too afraid to mean. And it had all come down to one Thursday, one unlocked door, one woman who wouldn't laugh and wouldn't leave. "Come with me," he said, the old words worn smooth now from years of saying them. "Not for a week. For the rest of it," she finished, and she came around the counter around it the way she always would now. No counter ever again between them, and she sat down close beside him in the quiet. A man's past does not disqualify him from love. His mistakes do not make him unworthy of it. His walls, however high he built them, and however good his reasons, do not have to be the last word on his life. Ethan Walker had believed all his life that a broken man's job was to protect everyone by keeping them at a distance, and he had been wrong, wholly and completely wrong, and the proof of it sat beside him now, with her hand in his, in the low light of a closed cafe. Love is not two perfect people finding an easy road. Love is two scared, scarred, imperfect people looking straight at each other's worst and deepest fear, and choosing on purpose out loud to stay. Claire Bennett had gotten out of her car at 4 in the morning when a frightened man begged her not to, and she had said 3 words into the dark, and those 3 words had built a family, healed a child, brought a ghost back to life, and outlasted every storm the years could throw. She had said, "I'm ready," and she had meant it all the way down for the rest of their lives. And that not the joke, not the counter, not the fear, but the courage of one person willing to show up, and one person finally brave enough to let her. That is how a broken man learns at last that he was never too broken to be loved.